for many museums and private clients in Utah and around the world. She has a BA in Visual Arts from Rutgers University, a BA in Art History from the Francois Rabelais University, and a BA and Master's in the Conservation of Sculpture from the Tours Superior School of Fine Arts. She has freelanced in France and North America on a wide variety of sculptures and objects from museum collections, churches, historical monuments, and for private clients. She has worked in places from the cloisters at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City to numerous churches and museums in France, including the Rodin Museum. Kim has published several articles, taught courses on object conservation, and helped lead workshops on degradation mitigation and safe display. Her accomplishments and experiences are too numerous to list, but we will link her website in the chat where you can learn more about Kim's wide-ranging experience and expertise. So I don't want to speak too fast, but some people joining already know what the Urbanek Map is. For those of you who don't, I'll just give a few quick bullet points. The Urbanek Map is a geographical relief sculpture measuring about 7 foot squared. It's handmade from balsa wood and adhesive using a straight edge razor. The Urbanek Map was constructed by longtime Moab local John Urbanek. He and his wife Anne entrusted the map into the care of the museum in 2005. As a pilot in the Korean War, John appreciated observing the world from a bird's eye view. He wanted to offer visitors a similar perspective of Moab from the ground. The map took over 20 years to complete, and it is comprised of 21 sections in the 7.5 scale represented by USGS topographical maps. For nearly 15 years, local and international visitors have marveled at the intricacy of John's detailed work. We are excited to host this event to share with the community about the treatment and care it is currently receiving in preparation to be displayed publicly again. So with that background, Mary is going to give some Zoom logistics for those of you who are not familiar with Zoom.
Hi everyone, I'm Mary Langworthy and I handle community relations at the museum. Just some nuts and bolts about Zoom and about Facebook Live in case you're new to this. We are happy to take your questions and comments. I'll be monitoring questions that are submitted through the chat at the bottom bar on Zoom, or if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, feel free to send us a comment in the comments section below, and I'll be happy to relay those to Tara and Kim at the conclusion of our conversation. Thanks, back to you, Tara.
All right, are you ready, Kim?
Yes, let's do this.
We are so happy to have you here with us. You have done so much for the museum, and I'm excited for our listeners to learn a little bit more about your work. So starting out, what does a conservator do, and what is conservation, and why is it important? Take your time.
Okay, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you both for your time tonight. I think it's a great opportunity for conservators to share what they do, explain what it is and why it's important. So let me tell you. I do conservation and restoration. So conservation is stopping or slowing down degradations, deteriorations, and preventing further damage. Whereas restoration is improving the aesthetic quality of the way things look. And taking into account the artist's original intention when he or she made that work. So concretely, being a conservator, I work on a variety of objects and materials. So objects include sculptures, fine art, so includes ethnographic objects, and historical items, sometimes treasures that family members or private clients want to keep in their families for a long time. And so before I take any action on an object, I first do a thorough examination of it. And that would include identifying the materials that an object is made out of, how it was made, what tools were used. This is all really important because once you identify all of these precise details, you can differentiate them from the other types of details that you're going to encounter when you're looking at an object that come from degradations or use. So there's a lot of time spent examining an object, taking measurements and photographs, documenting everything. And then I will propose a treatment proposal to the owner of an object. And a lot of times that would include steps that are prioritized, and of course an estimate of how much time it would take to do that and how much money it would cost. So conservation is really important because I want to make sure that objects last as long as they can. And that's important because objects have stories to tell about the people who made them, the people who used them, the people who cared about them, and the people to come that are going to learn about all of the people past and present. And so without these objects, the risk is that we forget our history, we forget our collective history, traditions, and even values. So if conservation wasn't happening to save all of these objects around the world, we risk forgetting our past or ignoring it, or misinterpreting stories of people before us.
Wonderful. Aligned with that, describe your conservation process as it relates to the Urbanek map.
Okay, so the very first thing that I did was, or actually the very first thing that you did, Tara, was to reach out to a conservator, which is a great step. And you told me about the observations you had made about the object, which is really important, that initial conversation with the person that's the caretaker of the object, whether it's a museum, a church, or a private client. You gave information to me, telling me a little bit of background about the object, the conditions that it was stored in, and any observations you made about why you think it might need conservation. We talked about goals that you had for this piece. So those are really important steps to not forget, because without that information, you even know about the existence of the object and your needs. So once we meet and talk about that, I do that initial examination that I was talking about before. And I write up a report, document everything I see, and understand my thoughts about what can be done and what needs to be done. And then once that estimate is accepted, I jump in, and the very first step that I do once an object arrives here is to spend time looking very closely. It might sound very boring and meticulous, but actually that step gives so much more information. And it's also a time for me to become comfortable with the object. So concretely with the Urbanek map, the first thing I would do after making my second observations is to test the stability of the pieces. So in this image below me, you can see a section actually, you see one small section that has been cleaned of one of the 21 sections of the map. And it's a zoom from the iPad that I'm using. So I get to see everything up close in detail when I'm working on these, but I have not yet seen the entire map put together in the 21 pieces. So my understanding of the object is different from what the visitors will see. So that was important to point out because it influenced on my perspective in the scale of what we're looking at. So I'll use tweezers, and I will also use a bamboo stick to test the stability of those pieces that I was talking about. So if I have a doubt, that's when I'll start to check it. But I pretty much scan the entire piece from one end to the other, checking for stability before I start cleaning. Sometimes I'll find broken buttes or pieces mixed in with the dust and debris, and those I will collect with tweezers and preserve in a bag for study, future use, or simply just conserving original material if it can't be put back where it was found. Then when that's done, I use a variety of brushes and tools that I'll show you later with a HEPA filtered vacuum that has an additional filter on the end. And I gently brush the debris and dust towards the vacuum and document what I see. So that really, the treatment for this piece is not complicated. It's time consuming and you have to be extremely, but otherwise it's the piece itself that really stands out in this job.
Very cool. I was just thinking that when you and I had a discussion about a month ago, when I was trying to write about what the museum was doing and with your help, what we were trying to accomplish, you shared with me how this was a unique piece for you. I'm sure everything that you come across and that you are working on is unique, but it really impacted me to hear about how this specific piece impacted you emotionally and in coordination with your family. What can you share with our audience about what has been unique about conserving this piece relative to your general experience?
I have a lot to tell you about this piece. First of all, I believe it is my first topographic map to work on. Second of all, it is a piece tied to a place that I know. I definitely don't know it as well as you all and the Moab community, but I love the landscapes of southern Utah. And I'm not from here. I know that Urbanek was not from Utah either. But it's a place that I've grown to love, particularly for the land. And so I've been on a few trips to Moab on different occasions with my family and friends. And I've had the occasion to hike and take photographs and make memories. And I've also met people who have been there too, so we can connect in those ways about this special place, the Moab area. And so working on this piece has really made those memories come alive and through tiny things. So I believe I've recognized places in Arches National Park on hikes where when we first moved to Utah, the very first year, my children went on their first hikes in Arches. And I can even see little areas where there's a pullout to park the car, get out and take a photo. It's amazing the detail that you can see in this piece. I also have been, as I'm working on cleaning all of these sections, of course, I'm extremely concentrated, and physically it can be difficult staring at a brightly lit area, listening to a very loud vacuum and being methodical. But there are also moments where my imagination takes over, and I can imagine a little mini version of me being a tiny explorer, or walking with my kids through the canyons, or being on the Colorado River. It's amazing the power that this piece has to transport you back, either to memories or to kind of create new experiences. It also has really reminded me how small man is. When we are there, we're on our feet and we're looking up in awe at these incredible landforms and taking thousands of pictures. But now working on it from my view and brushing out tiny little pieces of dust that are actually huge in comparison to the scale of the canyons, it reminds me how small we are, and how vast and overwhelmingly beautiful the land is. And so that really gives me an appreciation and respect for the land that I thought I had already, but it really reinforces it and makes it more powerful as I'm working on it. One of the other things I've been amazed by is the attention to detail that Urbanek has shown in this piece. It's amazing. I don't think any words or images down here on the screen are gonna pass that on to you all, unfortunately. And I realize I'm very privileged to be able to see this up so close. When it's on display, you can't hover over the map in sections. So I realize I'm lucky to have that experience, probably very similar to Urbanek making it. And so knowing that he paid attention to all of this beautiful detail, and used his hands and a blade to make this enormous map. And that takes me that he cared enormously about this project, and that he wanted to pass it on to other people. You wouldn't spend this much time on something for yourself. It would be, you know that it's going to be to share with other people. And the last thing that really makes it unique is that this really reminds me of time in so many ways. The passing of time, erosion, and how it's created these canyons and rivers. It also reminds me of how much time he spent making this. 20 years of one's life is no small effort. It also reminds me of the time people have spent coming to see it, and that I can see those physical traces of visitors coming through, walking by, the dust blowing, hairs falling off people's heads as they're pointing out canyons and saying, hey, remember when we went there? And it also reminds me of the time that I'm spending cleaning every little centimeter. It's not nearly as much time, but time is definitely something that's on my mind as I work on this piece.
Well said. Yeah, it really echoes how John Urbanek, this map has often been referred to as his love letter to Moab. It took a lot of time for him to make it, and he must have thought a lot of this area, just like you're describing. What do you most enjoy about the work that you do?
Well, I add really quickly, I can't believe I didn't say that. I was really touched by his love of the land. That's why this is happening. I reached out to you to tell you about my experience working on it, because I was just overwhelmed with the fact that someone can spend so much time and energy and care creating this piece. it really makes me think not only of the land and how we're connected to the land and all these different people from all over that go to Moab and then go back to their homes. It also made me think of the people who have lived here for centuries and how we all have this connection through time and place. So it was really a powerful moment. Anyway, had to say that. What do I most enjoy about the work that I do? I love being able to make those connections. It's working, I only get to work on pieces, my space, in my quiet corner by myself. I'm constantly thinking of the people who made the objects I get to work on. I'm thinking of the people that have carried on these objects since they were made and the stories that, the history of the piece is the term that we would use, but it's really all of these connections with different people and how it's come to me, and I get to prolong the life of that object and those stories, and sometimes even reveal the stories and information that goes hidden. And I also think of the future generations that are going to get to see these pieces, whether it's in a museum or passed down through family or in a church. I mean, really all of these objects were made by people, for people in the past, but they're also for people in the future. And it's a privilege. I really feel it's an honor. I love my job and and I love being able to do that for people. I don't get to meet those people. I don't usually interact with them. I don't make any physical or personal connections with them, but in a way I do. And it's through caring for these objects that I get to.
It sounds like it would be really impacting. You take your work so seriously and it's so personal for you to have a new interaction with every single piece because you work on it so closely that you're kind of forced to think about completely different objects all the time. The next question that I had for you, you've kind of already touched on it, so we can skip over it unless you want to add some more. Does your work often impact you on a personal level, or was the Urbanek map extraordinary? And I think you stated it was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I haven't worked on a piece that I can really compare it to, but I have to say everything I work on has an impact on me personally. I've thought about that, and really every piece has its own story to tell, has the people behind it, what it's been through, and what it can teach us about. Well, it really varies depending on the object, but I get to learn from everything that I've worked on, not just technical information and have the oh, that's a great point. Sorry, I get distracted by the chats. That is a really good point. Yeah, so I am really touched by the fact that people really do care about these objects. That's probably one of the most important impacts that my job has on me. Is those connections between all of these people that they're not virtual interactions, but it's kind of a continuation of being able to communicate with people in the past and communicate with people in the future. It's strange, and it all ends in these closed, quiet spaces in my mind or with the object. But it's a very intimate experience, as you were hinting at before, and that has been good and bad, actually, because over the years I really enjoyed doing what I do, and I'm a bit of an introvert, so I'm well suited to be working in my corner. But over the years, I've started to feel kind of far from the people that I'm talking about, whether it's people in the past or people that I'm working for. And I think I would like to share what I do more with people. They need to know, because the worst thing is to know that all of this effort and love has been put into caring for objects and they're ignored or hidden in a corner. So I'm trying to do that. I don't know that it's something new for me in any case, to reach out, to work on outreach and education, to share these stories that the objects have to tell. So sharing the stories like we're doing tonight, and sharing the stories that I've learned from working on objects with my students in art classes. So this is really a way for me to make those connections a little bit more tangible and meaningful.
We certainly appreciate you sharing it. You're very good at communicating how much something means, and from your personal perspective. So thank you. The next question I have, I want to ask all these other questions, but I know if I get off track, we will run out of time. But so a lot of things, people might imagine that you get an object or you get a new assignment and you already have on paper some history, some information about that object. What would you say that a conservator can learn from an object through treatment alone? So say that you have an object and you don't really know a whole lot of its history. I'm sure there's things that you can tell about it as you're working on it, as you're looking closer. How do objects tell stories without documented histories? And do you have any stories or instances that you would like to share about, something, a painting or a sculpture that you had in front of you and it seemed very clear, on the surface what it was about, but then as you looked closer, you started to notice something completely surprising?
That's a good question. I'd say that most of the time, documentation of objects is pretty basic, if there is any. And so a conservator can learn a ton about a piece that would kind of document its history for sometimes the first time through observation. And so I can give lots of different stories. I could also tell, and that would take a very long time. But I'll have to tell you at another moment. What I do want to say is that a lot of times you can, by identifying a material that has been used to make a sculpture, you can figure out where it was made, sometimes when it was made. So a piece that I worked on for my diploma did not have any documentation. And after I ran tests on the identification of wood and the ground layer of the paint layer, I was able to pinpoint that to Southern Europe, the piece that I'm talking about, and then further to Italy, because I had researched the different types of wood that was used to make these sculptures. And also I know the ground layer, the traditional techniques for the ground layer that are used in Southern Europe as opposed to Northern Europe. So sometimes that information can help you date an object and know where it comes from. Other times you can find traces of substances in a vessel, for example, that would tell you how it was used. You can also find devotional sculptures, for example, that, might be in a museum today, but because of the traces of soot near its feet, you know that it was used in a church and that people came to light candles at its feet. And sometimes you can even say, look, this is black. It must have been really popular, and people must have come to light lots of candles for this one in particular. Another example could be patterns that start to appear when you're observing a sculpture or an object. Sometimes I'll note an observation, a hole, for example, and then after I've made the entire observation, I can see patterns of certain holes that at first glance might seem like use, but after seeing a distinct pattern, you can tell that, oh, that hole was made on purpose originally, and now it looks like a hole because there was something here that is no longer present. So there are lots of examples. You can also see signs of love of an object, good intentions, and you can also see signs of neglect. Really, every observation you make as a conservator kind of tells its own information. So it can tell you, you can look at traces that at first glance seem to be something. After investigating, making hypotheses, you can start to reason and identify more closely what you're looking at.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not going to share my crazy stories. Not tonight, maybe next time.
That's okay. You can tell them to me later.
Okay.
So while we have you talking to us tonight about conservation, I'm sure there might be some people who are wondering, outside of a museum context, what's the single most valuable thing an ordinary person with a valued item can do to preserve that item? If they don't have a whole lot of background, what do they need to look out for? What might they want to consider, when it comes to something buried in the attic in a cardboard box? What would you recommend?
Right. Great question. So I'd say the most important thing is to use common sense and be vigilant. So when I say that, I mean watch out for. Okay, let's take an example. If you want to display an object in your home, you don't want to put it in daylight. You don't want to leave it behind a window. That will cause irreversible damage. And when I say vigilant, I mean keep an eye on it if it is on display. Make sure dust doesn't collect. Dust is not only is it a problem aesthetically, people don't like to see dust on objects, but it is a problem for its conservation, and more so than you think. It's not like dusting off your table. Dust can actually scratch surfaces, and if it scratches a table, that's not such a big deal because you use your table every day. But an object is not meant to, well, depending on the object, on display is usually not meant to be handled, and you don't eat off of your objects the way you would on a table. So dust can scratch the surface irreversibly, right? So if you have a varnished object, for example, it will scratch the varnish, and then you're revealing another layer of an object and exposing it to new dangers. So dust, I just want to say a word about that. It can attract other problems besides scratching a surface. There are certain pests that like to eat dust and organic matter. that's on a surface. So you can actually be attracting pests that will not only eat the dust, but also the material that it's made out of, if it's organic. And it can also contain mold spores that under certain conditions can provoke mold growth. So these are kind of, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about common sense. Don't put objects near sources of heat, for example. And if you have to keep them in the basement, make sure they're off the ground. And you could easily protect it with a layer of plastic sheet, polyethylene, so that you prevent any water damage from possible leaks, for example. Specifically, I'd like to say, if you want to know more tips for you to care for your objects at home, I think that's great. I would highly recommend that you visit the American Institute for Conservation's website. That is culturalheritage.org. And on their website, you can find specific tips organized by materials and types of objects, from paintings and photographs to sculptures and textiles, to care for your treasures. That's what it's called. Go to the website and click on caring for your treasures, I think it is. And you can find well-written documents that have tips on how to care for your objects and when to contact a conservator. And adding on to that, on the same website, you can use their tool, Find a Conservator, to find accredited conservators that can help take care of your objects so that you don't accidentally harm them in trying to take care of them.
Excellent. Those are really helpful resources. Thank you. I have one question left before you give your demonstration. It's kind of a several-part question. You've kind of already shared for us the value in conservation cleaning a little bit, and how treatment impacts an object's appearance without physically adding to it. Like with the Urbanek map, it's not like a painting where you're touching anything up. You aren't altering it by adding, you're altering it by restoring it, by taking away what wasn't meant to be there in the first place. For just a moment, if you could expand on why we wouldn't add color to a faded painting, why this is important, and what is the general ethic around this topic?
Okay, this is something that is really important to me. Conservators follow a code of ethics. And for me, I think it's probably the most important part of what I do. It all boils down to, why am I intervening on this object? I am trying to conserve it, preserve it for future generations. And I am not in any way allowed to or wanting to change the object. So I am not here to erase traces of time. I'm not here to add on something that's missing in the way that I see the object. That's not my role. I am here to protect what is original, what the artist intended, and I can help kind of integrate areas of loss so that they're not so disturbing, but I'm not here to redo things the way I think they should be done. And I was trying to think of a way to explain this. A poem or a piece of music, if you had a missing piece, missing words, so part of it torn, and you didn't know the original, you wouldn't fill it in with missing words. You wouldn't add your own notes to a piece of sheet music that had a part missing, because you would be taking, it's not your role to do that, right? If you tried to do that, you'd be changing the original intentions of a poet or a musician or an artist in my case. And it's not my place to do that. If one were to do that, the danger is that the object is going to be misinterpreted. And that can be really dangerous when you start messing with the intentions of someone not communicate with. And it really kind of is a way, if I were to do that, I would be putting some of myself into the object, which is not at all what I do. And I take that really seriously. So a conservator doesn't have the right to do that. And it's not our intention to kind of change or remake an object. So, sorry, getting back to your original question, what I can do is an object that is deteriorated, I can try and make those traces less problematic so that people can see the object for what it is. So in the case of the poem or sheet music, you just simply would explain to the visitor, this is missing information. We're going to keep what is original. We have an idea, but we're not. You all are frozen. For me, okay, you're back. If those integrations are made, like in touching a piece that has paint loss, for example, that is, it can be done if it is justified, if it's been researched, if it's been documented, and if it's reversible. So that's really a lot to consider before you actually take the step of deciding to do something like that. And so I guess something that people probably don't think conservators do, or it doesn't come to mind, is we spend a lot of time thinking and considering all of our options, weighing the benefits, and making sure that everything we do is justified ethically. Our goal is not to make the loss disappear, it's just to make it less noticeable. And so we use reversible materials so that if something does go wrong in the future, it can be taken off without harming the object. We document everything so that anyone who comes to work on it 100 years later knows what we did. And for the most part, everything is reversible. In some instances, it's not. And that brings me to this piece. Removing the dust and debris is an irreversible intervention. But the reason that I'm doing it, as I was explaining, it's twofold. One is that it's covering parts of the object that people can't even see or don't know they're there. So that's disturbing the artist's original intention. And then second, leaving dust on the surface. Excuse me. Leaving dust on the surface is problematic because it can scratch balsa. Balsa happens to be an extremely soft wood, if not the softest, I think. And so it can even be scratched with a brush, a bristle brush that's too hard. And it can be encrusted over time in the pores of the material. And as I said before, it can attract pests and other problems like mold. So there are good reasons to remove the dust, even if it is irreversible.
Thank you. I think that sums up the questions that I had prepared. We would love a demonstration so that the audience could see how you've been working on the Urbanek map, if you'd be willing to show us.
Yes, I'd love to. I might have been talking too long. I'm sorry about that. It might be a bit short, but I will just go over to the map. And if you look at the image of the map on the screen, I am going to continue the cleaning. You can see in the center of the image, I've cleaned small sections so that you can compare the after cleaning to before cleaning. So, oh, I'm using my hand as if you can see. Okay, I'll just go over there. Be right back. Okay. All right, how is the sound?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I'm putting on my gloves real quick.
There's a little reverb. Just a moment. Everything will get sorted.
Kim, we're getting a little reverb between the two, so perhaps if you wanted to just explain on your computer and then do a little demo on the iPad, that might work best. Thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yes, I will explain as you said. And so I'm going to put on my gloves. I'm going to use a variety of tools and start cleaning with my vacuum. I was going to show you a few tools and explain over there, but if I just leave my audio off, that might be best. So I can show you just very quickly the types of tools that we use in conservation. The bamboo stick is extremely helpful. In this case, I'm not using a cotton swab or any solvents to do any cleaning, but that's usually what we use it for. Also, almost always use our handy scalpel. I don't need it for the Urbanek map, so I won't be using it today. I use tweezers like this to test the stability of the pieces that look unstable, also to collect pieces when they're broken. And the brushes that I have here, I use a variety of brushes. This one's very soft and synthetic fibers. You'll notice all of the tips of the brushes have masking tape on them. That is because typically on a brush that doesn't have that, you can see a metal rim, and this metal rim could potentially scratch any surfaces. So the masking tape protects the object from any of those kinds of problems. Okay, so I'm going to be using these two brushes during the demonstration. They're pretty small, and they've been working well for me. So I'll go over there now.
So I'll narrate a little bit. What she's holding is a very gentle vacuum that has a filter on the top, so that as she's vacuuming, if there's any loose pieces that have broken off, they won't go into the vacuum. They will remain suctioned to the fabric there, and she can easily take them off. So you can see from watching her that this is a long process, and takes a lot of time to get into all of the nooks and crannies and changing of the brushes for the places that are a little more confined. And you can see the dirt and the piece on the tip there.
I'll jump into really quickly and just add that Kim has shared some awesome time-lapse footage of cleaning of the Urbanek map that allows you to see this process happen really quickly. And if you haven't checked that out on Facebook or Instagram on the museum's account thus far, it's pretty cool to watch.
Wow, so much dirt. Wow, that's really cool. Hi, Kim. I tried my best from what you've told me before to kind of narrate while you were doing your process what was going on. I hope that I was accurate in my depictions.
Well, thank you. I couldn't hear what you were saying because the vacuum cleaner is very loud. And I had to stop now just because the iPad actually, even though I have about a foot of space, I can't put my head where it needs to be to make sure that I'm doing my job well. So I feel like this is a good time to stop that. I'm sorry that it's short for our viewers.
It was adequate for everyone to see in what short amount of time you got so much dirt. And then the fragment didn't go into the vacuum cleaner. It remained there and you could retrieve that.
Right. Yeah, that was a great moment to share.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
We've had a number of awesome audience questions coming in too, and I'd love to throw a few of those your way after that demonstration. A few folks have been asking something along the lines of how should this be displayed in the future in order to minimize potential future dirt and just ensure its longevity?
I'll speak to that really quickly. With Kim's advice, we have discussed ways of displaying it with or without a vitrine. And we've really come to the conclusion that fundraising will be necessary for future public display on a platform and with a vitrine that is, it's not glass, but it's a plastic material that covers the map so that in the future that kind of dirt will not accumulate. That's an investment that we will be fundraising for, and it will cost between $15,000 and $18,000. But we're very invested in making sure that in the future when we display it publicly that it's protected.
Absolutely. A couple of other folks have made comments just appreciating your wonder and excitement that you feel as you climb over the canyons and follow the river. And someone compared it to Google Earth. And I thought that was a striking comparison, just being able to zoom in and out of a landscape. So just wanted to give voice to that comment. Somebody was also wondering if the edges of the map are noticeably dirtier than the middle of the map, if you can tell kind of what was along the edge and where people might have been leaning over versus the center.
That's an awesome question, but I can't answer it now, only because I have received the sections of the map in boxes, and although I label everything and document everything, as I said before, I have not seen it placed in its grid. So I'm unable at this moment to kind of put together all of the images, but when I'm done, I will put everything together. I can kind of put the puzzle pieces back in order and be able to determine which parts were most covered in dust and debris that way. That's a good question. And the Google Earth comment, I think, is awesome. I look at Google Earth quite often. My son is a geography enthusiast, and I think it's actually very similar to kind of zooming in and zooming out of Google Earth, but in a tangible way that's really amazing.
Sure. Somebody else was wondering, what can you do with tiny little pieces that break off? Do you find them way down in the gully and it's hard to know where to put it back? What happens to the little bits of things that get stuck to the vacuum?
Yeah, that's another great question. Most of the time when I do that initial test of stability, I find small parts that are kind of hanging on. Other times there have been big pieces that have fallen off, like whole buttes that are, about that size, and that they are placed just laying on the top. So those are pretty easy to find where they came from. Even the smaller ones that are about this small, because I can see traces of adhesive on one side that match up with the shape and texture and aspect of a nearby broken piece. The smaller ones, like the one that you saw during the demo, I believe that one was just laying on the surface. And so parts like that, sometimes I can see where they come from, other times I can't, and other times they don't actually come from that piece. So those are always conserved in a little bag. You saw I picked it up with the tweezers. That will be placed in a small bag that remains with this section, which is A2. And that way, you know, in the future, if there is more time put into taking care of this piece, it can be replaced with lots of research of finding out where it came from. And it also is a bag that's set aside for other pieces in the future. If that does happen again, they can be collected and preserved.
Great. A couple other folks were wondering a little bit more about the adhesive and how this was glued together in the first place. Are you like using the same adhesive that John Urbanek used to stick stuff back together? Is there evidence that that adhesive is delaminating? What's the state of that?
Okay, another great question. So I don't have all of the information. I have seen that he has used different types of adhesive throughout the 21 pieces over 20 years. I'm assuming that at some point he ran out of glue, maybe used what he had on hand. So some adhesives work better than others. I have to say most of the problems don't come from the adhesive degrading. They come from pressure due to contact from handling. Yeah, I would say almost every problem that I've seen has been probably because of mishandling. If we think about the time period and what he would have on hand and what he might use, I'm assuming that for the most part he used polyvinyl acetate, PVA, also known as wood glue. It works very well. It's stable, it's flexible, and it's durable. And you know, this is not an old piece, so it's really well adapted to the needs of this piece and the material. So I am using, in this particular project, I am using PVA as well to re-adhere broken pieces. And although we can talk about the reversibility of that or not, when you generally in conservation, when you reattach a broken piece, you want to make sure that it's not going to fall off, obviously. And you also want to make sure that the power of adhesion to the material is not too strong. What might happen in that case is if it gets mishandled again, that would be so strong, that bond, that another piece would break off, a different piece. And so in conservation, it would be better for the repair that I make to be weaker so that it's easier to access and it doesn't create a new break.
Yeah, there's a bunch of comments and questions coming in, and as we're about at an hour, I don't know if we can get to all of them. I will give you one, however, from Rory, who says, "Hi, Auntie Kim. I want to know how many layers were used in the map." And that's a great question, Rory. I want to know that too.
It is. Hello. And Rory, my niece, is watching from Australia. So I am amazed and so happy that she's here. That is such a great question, and it makes me think that's got to be Rory. I have not taken the time to count the layers of balsa wood, but I'm going to do that right now. Actually, that's a really good question, because something I did notice is that some sections of the map are just a few inches tall. Other sections of the map are nearly a foot tall. And what I've noticed is when John Urbanek wanted to create height quickly, he would use thick pieces of balsa wood at the base and then thinner pieces of balsa wood to create those fine layers that you've seen. So that is such an awesome question, and I'm very glad that you asked it.
I'll tell Rory that you'll get back with a very accurate answer.
Oh, she can count on me. You all can count on me. I will get you that information.
Awesome. I'll just relay one last little comment that we got from Amy Urbanek, who said, when this map was in our basement, we would be able to trace where we had hiked during the day. And I think that's, thank you to Amy and Anne Urbanek, who have been tuning in this evening. And I think that that just captures the magic of this piece and the importance of this map to the community really well. So thank you everybody for the comments and questions that came in. I'm sorry for those that I haven't been able to get to and relay in time, but I'll reply to the Facebook comments and give more detail and information where possible. And thank you, Tara, and thank you, Kim, for all of your work and for being a part of this evening. I think this has been really enlightening and a great educational opportunity for everybody to learn a little bit more about the importance of conservation. So just a little end note, this is a Tuesdays with the Museum virtual event. We have these several times per year, and you can check about the next ones and view past recordings on our website. If you are not yet a member of the museum, that's a great way to support the work that we do. And that's also something that you can learn more about on our website. And with that, thank you everybody so much for tuning in, and we will bid you a good night. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Tara.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Bye-bye.